Hello and welcome to this special edition of the CISO Unplugged podcast. My name's Nick Rafferty, co-founder and CEO of SureCloud, and I'm joined by Jon Staniforth.
Hi, I'm Jon Staniforth. I'm a CISO of over 20 years experience. I'm currently doing a mixture of consulting and interim CISO and using the dreaded vCISO word occasionally.
So on the topic of communication during crises, you worked in organisations where disruption could be headline news. In the face of a major incident, why is communication such a defining factor in how effectively a business responds?
So I think the key is I've been involved in multiple organisations that have had public-facing issues. The challenge for organisations is to determine how much they're able to share at a point in time, depending on the incident type, and to keep messaging consistency. So you don't want to say to the public, all the customer data is safe, to have to potentially undo that message a few weeks later. So it's really balancing out what's the right level of messaging.
And is all of that planned out in advance then, in terms of you've got a plan in place of communication? And is it based on, I guess, a classification of information, those sorts of things?
I think it's more, there's a structure and the process of who should be involved in agreeing the comms. So all companies will have a corporate communications type of function. You've obviously then got legal and compliance and cyber and various other stakeholders in the executive team. And each type of incident might have a different thread or methodology. So it's more a data breach through data theft versus a ransomware incident. And I think what people don't understand is at the beginning of a cyber event, the impact can happen quite quickly, but the research to understand what happened can take days, even just to understand how it happened. So some of the big public events that we've seen, if you notice, it's a few days before they can say, yes, it was definitely a cyber attack and this is what we think happened, because that takes much longer than the impact to customers.
And how does a reporting window impact the organisations? I'm assuming that gets taken into account from a planning perspective.
Yeah.
And does that clearly put the pressure on in terms of...
Again, based on this incident type, so if you know on your day one that data's definitely been stolen because maybe your own organisation spotted the issue and it wasn't necessarily ransomware, but somebody stole data or someone said, I've got a set of your data, obviously that reporting timeline to, say, the ICO kicks in quite quickly and you've got to track that. In other cases, it might be a suspicion of potential personal data theft. So you have to do your technical research to say, yes, actually, we do think the data was stolen. So therefore, the reporting timeline doesn't kick in, maybe even to a few days or even a few weeks later.
Okay. So moving on to continuity versus recovery. When something breaks, a lot of organisations instinctively rush into recovery and fixing things. What does good continuity planning really involve, and how is it different from recovery?
So I think what happens is you've got to sort of separate your tracks when an incident occurs. And again, it depends on the incident type. So is it like your website's gone down and actually you don't know it's a cyber attack or an IT issue? Is it that more of your business operations has been affected by what may or may not be ransomware? Or is it like a data theft example? So all of those different scenarios will have a different impact on how the organisation operates. And the challenge is often it costs money and time to both implement business continuity in action, and then if it's a false start, that could be more costly to undo it and go back to normal ways of working. Yeah. So that first sort of window of time in every company is trying to assess the actual damage. And is it more an IT outage where rebuilding a couple of servers might take IT a day, but actually that outage is worth retaining than kicking your full continuity plan, which might take you then days or weeks to undo. Yeah. Versus actually, do you have enough information in the early days to say, yes, now start invoking continuity? I think there's a big difference. So in business continuity is what are the essential services you want to continue delivering versus necessarily the full service set that your organisation does. Yeah. And then separating that's different to IT disaster recovery, which is bringing systems back up. And sometimes you'll be running both in parallel, the BCP and the ITDR, and joining back up once those two things are back in place, back to nearer your original business
that makes
activity.
Sense. And that kind of leads us nicely into resilience, the big picture. So resilience is often seen as the end goal of this preparation. From your perspective, what are the biggest levers that security and risk programs can use today to implement resilience? Is it technology, governance, or something more cultural?
I think it's probably a balance of the cultural and the governance first, because I think we're moving away from the era of just trying to slap more and more security controls in place for detection and more locks on doors or on computers, to more a realization that it's not just about a confidentiality breach anymore, it's more about sort of business existence. And therefore the swing, I think, is becoming more important to invest in the ability to keep the key services running as a business.
Yeah.
And that might have to be prioritized investment over, say, building more detection tools or more network segmentation. None of us want the incident to happen. But if your business can't recover tomorrow, spending a year segmenting your network isn't necessarily the most value for money.
Yeah. And you think that's a mindset shift from all of the sort of prevalence of breaches these days? It's like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's a mindset shift.
Yeah, and that's back to culture. It's a mindset shift, but also a shift that is not just a technology problem or a cyber problem. It's back to does your business know how to operate? Can you rerun your payroll? If the payroll systems are down, whether it's an IT incident or a cyber incident, becomes moot point. It's can you pay all your staff next month?
Yeah. So there's been a number of recent examples. Last week with AWS, and last year we've seen CrowdStrike and other tech giants suffer major outages. Even for the best prepared, it's proof that incidents are inevitable. Are there any lessons fellow CISOs should take from this?
Yes, I think the first thing is, at the moment, neither of those issues are attributed to a cyber incident, which is the point I was making earlier about it's almost irrelevant whether it's a cyber incident or an IT outage. I think the business's complexity and the technology complexities that sit underneath it are getting harder and harder for organisations to understand how complicated they've made their own lives because of outsourcing, SaaS provisioning, etc. And so I think that focus on business resilience and understanding what's important to operate and what they're relying on is becoming sort of the lesson that not just CISOs but CIOs have to learn as well, and then feed that back into the CEO function and the other execs.
I think it's a really good point, John, because obviously it's not just about the organisation itself. There's a direct link with the supply chain, not just third parties, fourth parties, etc. So how do you build resilience against disruption that emerges from the supply chain?
So I think the thing that I mentioned earlier about business complexities becomes so huge. I think we've also got to recognise we can't fix everything. So the main thing is to understand what are your crown jewels or your key business processes, and map the technology and the supply chain, where it's third party, fourth party, fifth party, that you rely on for that. In some very regulated industry sectors, it's almost forced on you, say like gambling or some of the more medical areas and parts of finance. But I think companies, as I mentioned, aren't regularly mapping sort of the full asset chain. So not just the technical assets, but their supplier assets and so on. And then you have to build that into contracts and more widespread resilience discussions with supply chain, because many of those suppliers may not be testing their own plans, may not even know how important they are to your organisation. Yeah,
so that makes sense. Yeah. And how much influence do you believe then in terms of, as you said, third party, fourth party, fifth party? How far can you influence in reality?
If it's really important to your business, then obviously you need to build it into your contract layer, but recognise that contracts are like the last resort if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
So if it's really important, you sometimes have to put your own resources into the supplier company if they're not mature enough to bring them to the level you need to use them for. So if your business is reliant on a supplier who is such a key to them, but that supplier's maturity isn't there, you've got to talk to your business about, well, do we invest our resources in helping them get where they need to be?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're relying on someone who can't achieve it as a critical path of your own profitability.
So we're here at the ISF World Congress this week, and there's lots of discussion about the future. So with your crystal ball, John, how do you see resilience evolving over the next 5 years?
I think they're going to go through a cycle similar to what we've seen in other parts of the sort of cyber focus, where we're going to start with, and we have been starting with regulatory-led focus.
Yeah.
So NIS and DORA are starting to get more heavyweight in, obviously, financial services sector and other sectors. And we're going to, I think, have to see more of that drive as companies, by nature, unfortunately, sometimes have to be driven by regulation to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Some businesses that are much more tech-focused, tech-led, and they've got their revenues orientated around that, I think have more of a clear understanding of my whole business disappears if I don't do this. So I think it's going to be that balance. But we're in a challenging environment where people have been trying to focus on detection controls and protection controls, and some are in a good place, but many aren't. And I think they're going to have to weigh up, do I build money into my business resilience instead of building more cyber controls until I'm at a level that I can start reinvesting the traditional cyber controls, whether it's detection, monitoring or prevention. So I think it's going to be a hard balancing act for many companies.
Yeah, interesting times ahead.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, John. It's much appreciated. Some great insights there.
Thank you very much.